Parler d'un projet qui s'appelle Colonie. Je laisserai Aron le présenter tout à l'heure. Est-ce que dans la salle il y a des membres d'Asset? Si? Ouais, super. Donc pour ceux qui ne nous connaissent pas, nous sommes une association loi 1901, donc but non lucratif, à peu près 300 membres, toute origine, tout horizon. On est des développeurs, des non-développeurs, des gens qui sont juste intéressés par Ethereum. Si vous voulez apprendre des choses sur ce protocole, mettre les mains dans le cambouis ou simplement suivre de nouveaux projets, vous pouvez venir nous voir. Tous nos ateliers sont gratuits, mais si vous adhérez, en payant la modique somme de 10 €, vous pouvez accéder à nos slides. Voilà. Donc si vous voulez adhérer à l'asset, vous pouvez aller sur asset.fr, a2seth.fr. On organise ce genre d'événement très régulièrement. On a pratiquement un événement comme ça pas de cette ampleur malheureusement, mais quand même un événement par semaine quasiment. Et on a un événement d'une bien plus grande ampleur très bientôt. Tadam! Ethereum Community Conference. Donc sachez que si vous êtes en mars à Paris, c'est une bonne occasion pour aller faire cette conférence, parce qu'on aura plus de 900 personnes parmi les participants. On aura une centaine de speakers sur 4 amphithéâtres, donc plein de streams différents. Si vous aimez... ça va très vite ce truc. Si vous vous intéressez à la sécurité sur Ethereum, à la scalabilité, aux réglementations, aux outils de développement, vous trouverez de quoi faire. Donc une conférence avec beaucoup de choses. Et je vous laisse découvrir la liste totale des speakers en allant sur ethcc.io si vous voulez déjà prendre votre billet ou regarder quels sont les différents speakers qui sont déjà annoncés. Donc ce soir, on reçoit un invité de marque, Aron Fischer, juste ici. Je vais dire quelques mots sur Aron. Ce sera une présentation en anglais, donc je vais passer à l'anglais. Donc, Aron Fischer is a core developer of Ethereum. He's someone that's working on Swarm. Swarm protocol is a decentralized storage solution built on Ethereum. And also on the project Colony, that he is going to tell us more about today. Aron, the floor is yours.
Hello. Hi, good evening. Yeah. Okay, so I am going to speak in English. Désolé. That's all I can do. So what I want to do today is give you an overview of the colony system that we have planned. I was one of the co-authors of the white paper, and that has been finished. It's published in the last fall. And now our developers are really working on implementing those ideas. And we've given talks at DevCon going back several years and always highlighting a particular aspect. But today I want to give you a full overview of the system. And I think this will be the most complete presentation of Colony I've given to date. So let's start with what is Colony. When we start talking about Colony, we talk about working together, coordinating large groups of people to self-govern and self-organize to run projects, whatever projects they're interested in. So it's about coordinating people, and we want to do this in a way that's not a strict hierarchy. We want it to be horizontal and networked and all these good things that we like to talk about. But the question is, how do you achieve something like that? How do you implement it? So now when we look at the big picture, we can start thinking, oh, well, we want people to work together. We want it to be, we don't want the rich to control everything. We want it to be fair, whatever fair means. We want the thing to be flexible. We want it to be scalable. And you start running through all these different criteria. So what might this look like? Like, what kind of a project could we even imagine? So suppose somebody makes a proposal, hey, we want a mission to the moon. What would that take? Right? It takes people who can, on our little example graphic here, it's for entertainment purposes, but so you need pilots, you need engineers, you need administrators, you need budgeting, you need lawyers, and how would you ever coordinate such a huge group of people? there's actually precedent for something like this, is the Hyperloop project. I don't know if you're aware of it. But one of the teams competing organized via Reddit and got incredibly far. It was just this Reddit group, and at first it was great, and a lot of people wanted to contribute. But towards the end, when they actually had success and it became a real question about time and money and budgets, they had a lot of problems because they had no governance structure. So Colony aims to be that kind of a platform where large teams can coordinate and self-manage. So I'm going to zoom in all the way to the smallest part, the atomic unit of a colony, which is a task. A task is a little piece of work, the smallest unit we subdivide every project into. So a task is, this is a smart contract, by the way, and I write it like this, it's a contract. So it's something on the Ethereum blockchain that encodes the interactions we're going to have. So there's a manager of every task, which is just a user account who handles some administrative functions. There's a description of the work to be done, and a due date, and other metadata. On the blockchain, you just have some kind of a hash, and that hash refers to an IPFS file or a swarm file or something. But so we know we have another user account who's responsible for evaluating. They're the ones who, after the work is submitted, get to say it's accepted or it's not accepted, and grade the quality. There's a bounty, the money to be paid for the worker, and manager and evaluator also get paid. So that's locked up in this smart contract, and the rules for how it gets paid out are encoded into it. And finally, there's a worker, which is the user account assigned to actually providing whatever the work is that is described. So the workflow will be like this. You create a task, you assign a manager, you describe the work, you write the brief, say when is it a failure, when is it a success, what are you expecting, you assign a budget, you assign an evaluator, and finally you assign a worker. And at that point, the worker should do the work, and we expect there to be a lot of communication back and forth. Like if you assign someone in your team to write a brief for you for something, they'll send it back to you, you send it back with corrections. I mean, there's all kinds of communications that you have in any working team that are not represented on the blockchain, because that would be ridiculous and expensive. But at some point, a blockchain action occurs, which is when the worker says, I'm done, I submit the work. And on the blockchain, that means they submit a hash, something that proves they did the work, whatever that may be. And then the evaluator would accept the work, and that unlocks the payment, and then everyone gets paid. And everyone also earns reputation in the colony. And I will have a lot more to say about reputation as we go along. Briefly. Reputation is an attribute you earn by doing work. And it's not something you can transfer. It's not a token that you can sell and move to other accounts. You get paid in tokens, and you can move those tokens to anyone and pay with things and exchange them, but the reputation gets stuck to your account. It's a measure of how much work you did and how many good contributions you did to this colony. And once you have reputation, you can do more things in the colony. You can create tasks, create domains, you can apply for funding. And a lot of the day-to-day decision-making in a colony is weighted by reputation. So it's those people that do the most work and get the best ratings from their peers who end up having the most influence. And it's not something you can buy. You can't buy influence in a colony. You have to actually earn it. All right, zooming out a level, we can subdivide larger projects into different parts. So a colony itself has some structure. We call them domains. So there's a colony-wide domain, that's everyone who contributed to anything in the colony, and that can be subdivided into subdomains and subdomains of that and subdomains of that. And the idea being that big projects get broken down into departments, get broken down into work groups, and all the way down to something that's manageable. And a lot of decision-making happens on the local level. Right, let me give a more detailed view. So here's an example of a colony which has a development domain, and the development domain has Go, C++, and JavaScript subdomains. Each one of these domains has its own budget, and budget gets assigned from higher up to lower down, from lower down to lower down, and from within the domains they assign it to the tasks, and the whole structure of how these funding flows happen, I have a few slides later on. And within all the domains are the various tasks. So when you do a task in the Go domain, down here on the bottom left of my screen, then you will earn reputation in Go. You will earn reputation in development, and you will earn reputation at the colony level. But you will not earn reputation in the C++ domain. Right? So reputation is local, and also decisions and votes are local. Whenever there's a need for voting, let's say there's a real big fight amongst the JavaScript developers about which way to go, if they can resolve that dispute within the JavaScript domain, it never has to bother anyone else higher up. So try to keep things as local as possible. And I think the idea behind this is, while voting is easy to describe on the blockchain, and a lot of people like saying, oh, well, you send signed transactions and the contract counts everything. From a human perspective, voting is hard work. It requires a lot of cognitive overhead, it requires time, there's also costs involved. So you want to minimize voting, and you want to, in many ways possible. One is limit the number of votes, and the other one is limit the number of people who have to have an opinion on every particular question. So that's why everything is kept local. And the reputation is local, so you ask the relevant reputation, which means that the developers can't interfere with the logo design, which is a very good feature to have. Unless, well, before I said that, it's always possible to force a vote going up the hierarchy. So you cannot appeal to a higher manager and his boss and his boss. What you can do is always appeal to a larger and larger and larger group of people. And the ultimate decider is a colony-wide vote. But the hurdles to get there are pretty high, because you don't want that to be used unless it's really needed. Right, so now I'm going to dive into some of these mechanisms. Right, so I have slides on pretty much these 6 topics, and I'm going to go through them, but not in this order. This is how I designed the slides this afternoon. So we have the funding mechanisms for tasks and domains. So we want to collectively manage funds. Of course, that has to be secure, but also has to be flexible. We always have this balance between being able to do something and being able to do it securely. So we can talk about that. Then there's earning and losing reputation. We want to reward good behavior and punish bad behavior. So how does that work? Then there's this reputation mining, which is a procedure I'll talk about at the end. I gave a presentation about it at DevCon, and it's about calculating everyone's reputation score off the blockchain, because it's a complicated calculation, but in such a way that you can still use it on the blockchain securely. Disputes, what happens when there's fights and disagreements, how do we deal with those? Then a note about the tokens that colonies use, and finally how the network fits together, and the special colony, the common colony, what that is. So, let's start with disputes. A dispute happens when there's a disagreement. So, up until that point, the first thing we want to do is we want to have it easy to do things. There shouldn't really be hurdles for you jumping in a colony, agreeing to do a task, and just doing work, right? If that's okay, if nobody objects, that should just be able to go along without ever needing a vote. On the other hand, it should be really hard to cheat. And those things sometimes do get in conflict. The easier it is to do things, the easier it is to do bad things. And the main mechanism we have to deal with this problem is that any action you do requires you to have reputation, and it requires you to put up some token as a security deposit. And if nobody objects, everything happens fine. If people do object, and then there is a dispute, then you could lose your security deposit. So there's a bit of game theory involved. So yes, it should be easy to do things. We don't want to be bureaucratic. We don't want to have to apply for permission. So that's what I mean by easy to do things. A permissive colony. And it should be hard to cheat. So suppose I create a task with the description do nothing. I assign myself as manager and evaluator and worker. I submit the work and I click pay and run off with the money. That should be impossible. Or really, really hard. So all actions require either reputation or some staked tokens or both. So to create a task in a domain, you need to have at least, I'm making up the number, I don't remember, 1% of the reputation in that domain. That qualifies you to be able to create a task, and then you have to put up some tokens as a security deposit as well, and they're This is only there so that you can get punished if it was wrong, if you did something wrong. But for the moment, you require tokens and reputation. We have security delays before anything happens. So, example, once your work is accepted by the evaluator in a task, you don't get paid until 3 days later. And during those 3 days, if you did do something naughty, like try to pay yourself out for doing nothing, somebody can say, hold on, everyone look here, this is wrong, and then they can start triggering a dispute process. Anyone with enough reputation can object to anything. If you see anything going on in your work group, in your department, that's not right, you know, and it doesn't have to be obviously fraudulent. Maybe we just had a conference call in our team, and we agreed we're going to do things one way, and then the person who didn't agree with us during the call immediately creates the task to do it the other way. Then I could cause an objection and just say, this is not what we agreed to, come on. So I can start that objection, and if that's all that is, my objection stands and the task gets automatically deleted. Again, we don't need another vote. It's only, yeah, right, or this task is a duplicate and should be deleted. It could be a small objection like that. If nothing else happens, it will be deleted. Right, the objection passes. But if somebody counters it, says, no, 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 your objection is wrong. I stand by what I did. Or, you know, somebody takes the counter side to you, that's when we have a dispute. And that's when we need to go into voting to resolve the conflict. So, for that to happen, somebody has had to say, I object, and put up their tokens and reputation. Somebody else will have had to say, no, the objection is wrong. Whatever we had here was correct, so I take the opposite side, and then we have a vote. And the vote is weighted by reputation. Again, the people who have earned the most reputation have the most weight, they can have the most influence within their domain. Right, the final point is, if we cannot agree, if there's a fight in a JavaScript department and they really don't disagree and they're really angry at each other, you can always escalate it one level higher to ask all the developers to weigh in on a question. And you could escalate it even higher to a higher domain. But every time you do, you have to stake more tokens and you're likely to lose more if the decision goes against you. So you're incentivized to keep things local. Yeah, and you get reputational rewards and punishments based on how you use or abuse this system. Right, so that ties into right nicely to reputation. While payment for tasks is a financial question, we also can tweak, because we're in control of reputation in the colony system, we can award reputation for certain kinds of behavior. We can very specifically target this behavior we like, this we don't like, and you try to govern the incentives of everyone in the system that way. So, earning and losing reputation. You earn reputation by doing good things, whatever good means, and you lose reputation by doing bad things. So, you earn it by completing work. That was the basic example, that's the most common. You also earn it by managing or evaluating work. You know, that's still, it's administrative work. It doesn't look like the worker tag of a task, but it's still, you do have real world activities, you get paid for it, and you get reputation in the management skill or the evaluating skill. No, yeah. So, and by winning disputes, you also get rewarded by reputation. So, and the last one is this reputation mining, which is special, and I'll talk about that later. And you lose reputation by failing to do work that you were supposed to do, by losing disputes, and by doing nothing. What that means is that your reputation decays over time. So if you earned a lot of reputation early on in the colony, it doesn't mean that forever and ever you'll have this huge set of influence. No, you have to stay active in order to keep up your influence and your reputation. So that's where we fine-tune the incentives. And so here's an example. If you raise a dispute on a question, like you force a vote, and the vote goes 90% against you, that means that everyone was against you, and you should have known. You're supposed to be in communication with the rest of the team. So you're just causing a nuisance, and you have a big punishment for that. You will lose your staked reputation and tokens entirely. But if you force a vote and it goes against you 51 to 49, you only lose a tiny percent, because maybe it was right to force a vote because it wasn't clear that there is a consensus. So those are the kind of things we do to fine-tune. We want people to use the dispute resolution when it's needed, but not, don't spam everything, like object to everything just because. And the decay, I have just mentioned earlier, yes, reputation drops off over time, and this means that even if there's a colony which is already pretty old, you can join that colony, you can start doing work, and if you do a lot of work within about a year, you're just as good as someone who's been there since the beginning. Like, you can really earn your part in it. And you can start creating tasks, you can start governing, you can start steering the project. So the project belongs to whoever is working on it in some sense. The other reason, which is sort of hidden and not really discussed that much in the white paper, is that reputation gets scaled by how much you get paid. Like, if you do a task worth 100 tokens, you will earn 100 reputation, plus or minus, depending on if you did good or bad work. But more or less, that's the only measure we have. Now, a token might be worth 10 cents at the beginning of a colony, and if it's lucky, it goes to hundreds of dollars. That means that later on, a task pays much smaller amounts, and then the numerical rewards for reputation are much smaller. And if reputation didn't decay, then everyone who did work really early on would forever and ever hold an unsurpassable lead. So with this decay, we have what we call the reputation aristocracy. Everything decays, and over time, any fluctuation in your token value is also buffered out. And reputation really means something, right? So that's reputation. And the reason we like using reputation is because you earn it for doing good work. It's not something you can buy. And all the day-to-day operations are governed by this. Right? We don't want owners to come in, buy a bunch of tokens, and then change the direction of the colony, because it's not theirs to do. But every once in a while, we do need to ask the token holders to decide something. There's some high-level decisions, like if you want to create new tokens, that's not something that only reputation holders should be able to decide, because it affects people who own the tokens, and there is a mechanism for this kind of large board-level decision-making. So it has to exist. Just 1 second now. Any questions so far? I have a water, so. No questions, right?
Yes. Can you explain again the difference between reputations and tokens, what you can do with tokens?
Yeah, the difference between reputation and tokens.
Just the previous slide.
Well, I can tell you, tokens are a cryptocurrency on the Ethereum blockchain. So you can transfer them freely between accounts, and you can sell them on exchanges, and for all intents and purposes, they can function as a currency if you want them to. But they're a transferable asset. Reputation is stuck to your account. If you do work at a colony, you will earn reputation, which is stuck to your account, and you cannot transfer it or sell it. You can only use it by making your voice heard in the colony. And that means that if you do work for a colony and you get paid in tokens, but you're not wealthy, you don't have a lot of money, so you immediately have to sell those tokens in order to pay rent, your reputation still stays with you. We still remember that you did good work for the colony, even though you don't have the payment still, because you used it for something else. So we want to split those two things, the financial side with the purely working side. All right, so I'm going to talk now about how this funding works, how we delegate funds. It's an important part. Now, I mentioned that every domain has its own funding pot, and generally we have two methods of funding. The one is called the basic funding proposal. It's the most common, and what it does, funds flow down this hierarchy at a certain rate. And in the spirit of this permissiveness that I mentioned before, that things should be just allowed to happen, you don't have to vote on everything all the time, also these funding proposals just happen. So if I say I want so many tokens from the colony root domain to go into the development domain, that will just start to flow in a certain sense. But if at any time before my funding proposal is completed, somebody objects, they can cause a dispute. So I should first check with my peers what we want to spend it on. But on the blockchain, it happens. And the more reputation you have backing a proposal, like you could make a proposal fund development and I can jump in, yes, I agree, and the other guy says, I agree, and the more people have committed to agree, the faster it flows. So we have a kind of balance, how long the security deposit is. If a person with very little reputation wants to direct a huge amount of money, it's going to take a long time, and during that entire time, people can force a vote if it was not agreed upon. Or they can join in and say, I agree, and then it flows a little bit faster. So there's that kind of a flow, and well, I don't want to get into that, but flowing a constant stream of funds is not exactly possible on the blockchain because nothing happens unless there's an interaction. But all that means is every once in a while somebody has to send a ping transaction to update all the balances. But we can simulate a flow. It's not really a big technical hurdle. But so when you read our white paper, you see a lot of description of these pinging contracts and updating these balances, and it doesn't really explain why we're doing this, but a lot of the reason why is there's certain things you just can't do on the blockchain. It's a very different kind of environment to be working in. Like you can't have something run autonomously. You cannot iterate over an array because if the array grows too long, you'll run out of gas. So there's all kinds of considerations when you build these systems, and our white paper goes into them in some detail. Okay, the other funding proposal is called a priority funding proposal. That can move funds in other directions. It can move them up the hierarchy, across the hierarchy, or out of the colony entirely. And they can be much faster. Like, we need to pay this guy now. That can happen, but it requires a vote, right? Clearly. With this mechanism in place, all the limitations from the continuous flow allocation, anything that's not good enough in that system, we can always do a priority proposal, and that can execute it as soon as the vote passes. That brings us to colony tokens, the currency, if you want. It's not always a currency, it can be what you want it to be. But every colony has its own tokens. And that means it's a token that can be transferred amongst accounts. And this allows you, if you're starting a colony, you can start paying people in your own colony tokens before they have a value, before you have investors, right? Like a startup offering shares or like a split of the company. We can have a fully functional colony right from the start. You can just create a bunch of tokens and start assigning token rewards. And if somebody believes in your project and can afford to defer payment for a while, you can join in, do work for these tokens, and hope that maybe you can sell them in the future. So this is a good way to get things started. And only bounties in the colony's own token will actually earn you reputation. What that means is that if you do work for the tokens of a colony, you want to be part of the project, you want to earn influence, you want to govern, you want to have a say in the direction this project goes, and you're part of the project and you will earn reputation. But if you say, no, I'll do work for Ether, but I don't want to have anything to do with your colony or its tokens, just pay me for the work and I'm out, that's fine as well. And external contractors might do that. They pick up work in your colony that you're paying in dollar tokens or your Ether tokens or whatever else. But they will not earn reputation. So reputation is only for the colony's own token. And I mentioned this earlier, but it's worth repeating. Changes in the token supply are possible. We can create new tokens. We are, it's not a fixed supply, but changes require a very high hurdle. So a majority of reputation has to agree, and a majority or supermajority of token holders has to agree before they can be diluted in this way. Right, that's tokens. Oh, this is still not clear. There are a lot of components to this whole project, and I'm trying to tie them all together in one talk, which I haven't tried before. So do stop me at any time. I like questions. But my next chapter is on the common colony, and so what is the common colony? It's a colony, and it has its own token, the CLNY. And it is responsible for the further development of the colony network. Like right now, us, the company, collectively intelligent, are developing the colony smart contracts, and we're developing an application, an interface that makes it easy to interact with these smart contracts and so on. But ultimately, we don't want to be in control, even not just that each individual colony is controlled by its members. The entire colony network and development should be in control of a decentralized community. And that is this common colony. The common colony functions just like any other colony, except that its mission is to further the development of the network, and it's also the one that's responsible for the reputation updating, the reputation mining procedure. This reputation mining system uses the common colony token, and it's a if you do mining, you earn reputation within this common colony. That's the only special thing about it. And for its efforts, it gets rewarded. From the rest of the network pays the common colony for the service it provides, namely running the reputation system and coordinating further development. So what does that mean? This is the first time I mentioned the network fee. What is the fee? I should say something about that. So ultimately, the whole network should be self-sufficient, and there are real costs involved in running it, especially with all the off-chain calculations that we need. I will talk about those later. But the idea is that whenever a bounty is claimed, so you don't need to see me, just the idea is that when a bounty is claimed, that is the very last step of the allocation procedure. So it goes from a domain to a subdomain to a task, and then once the work is submitted, the evaluator has accepted the work, and the security delay is over, and that's when the tokens finally leave control of the colony. You get paid out. At that step, 1% gets redirected back towards the network, and it collects either in the common colony directly or in a central pot, the various currencies where they get auctioned off for common colony tokens. But this is the sort of the feedback loop where a small fee goes back into the network and the common colony benefits from it. So that's an income for the common colony that the others don't have, but any colony could have an income, could be profitable. They could be so some colonies might be businesses that with a real business model, others might just be non-profits or clubs. Like you can give your token whatever meaning you want. They could be just as meaningless as upvotes, right? You can create new tokens within your little colony as you guys see fit, and you don't have to give it a financial meaning, but it could. And you can offer services to be paid for in your token or not. But whatever happens, at some point, it's possible that somebody pays your colony. So somebody sends you money. What happens? If somebody pays you back in your own tokens, that's great. You can immediately reallocate them to new tasks. So it's just a clean loop. But if somebody pays you in other things like Ether or dollar tokens or any number of other tokens, then that counts as revenue, and so it gets held in a special revenue account, and every once in a while that gets processed, and the way it gets processed is that most of it goes straight back to working capital to be assigned to new tasks and payment, but some of it gets allocated to rewards. So rewards, I wrote 90% and 10% here, but those numbers could change, and the colony can change them. But what it means is we get to, if you own tokens and reputation in a colony, you get a share of the rewards. Right? It's just the profits gets spread out to its members. Notice I say tokens and reputation. It's not just tokens. So you can't buy tokens from some unrelated colony and hope to just earn revenues from other people's work. no, you have to be a member of this colony. You have to have done some work, and the amount of rewards you get paid depends on an average of both tokens and reputation. So the more you have of both, the more you're likely to get of this revenue, of this profit payout, the rewards. Yeah, so yeah, I think that's all I will say about that. When I say a note on salaries, the reason I put up this slide is because we always get asked, but you know, what about non-transactional work, right? Not every kind of work is so easily pocketable into little units of work, and what happens if, like, you know, we talk to a lot of startups, so a lot of startups come with, yeah, but what about the founder who's coordinating everyone else, but he isn't actually doing any tasks themselves? How do we deal with that? And the answer is, you can do almost anything you want as long as there is consensus, right? As long as you agree. So many forms of employment are possible. If you want a salaried position, the way we would do that on the blockchain is there would be a special domain of which you are the only member, and that domain has a certain flow of funds, which we call your salary, and every once in a while you can, in that domain, which you have all reputation of, you create a task to pay yourself out, and you get paid. And all of this stuff, this construction can be abstracted away by a good interface. Like, it doesn't matter that on the blockchain it's represented by a domain and a task. You know, if you have a nice colony app, it could render this as a salaried position separately. So there's a lot of front-end abstraction you can do, but for security reasons and, you know, other reasons, we want to keep the contracts as simple and as basic as possible. So, you know, just domains and tasks, if we've got those right, that's great, and then we can do more on the front end by, you know, making a salaried position, or yeah, the other thing we get asked is rewarding people with extra reputation. You know, like a founder who did a lot of great work early on, but then sort of stepped back, and a year later, when the development's done, all their reputation has decayed away, and we all think that's kind of unfair because it was their idea. We can agree to make a special task which says, you know, pay this person, you know, 1,000 tokens, and to qualify for that task, they have to pay us 1,000 tokens, so just launder them through, and voila, they have new reputation. So all of these tricks and games are possible. Really, the takeaway here is, as long as you agree amongst yourselves, you can do these things. Like, we don't want to impede doing, we just whenever there's dispute and disagreement, that's where you have to be sure that we're secure and not gameable. And that brings me to my final chapter, which is reputation mining. And these slides are, they're from my DEF CON 3 talk. I gave a rundown of the reputation mining protocol. And yeah, you'll see there's a reference to DEF CON in these. So your reputation is not just a number that's tied to your account, because we keep track of what work you did, in which domains, using which skills, earning how many tokens, and how you were evaluated, and what your peers thought, and so on and so on and so on. Like, it's a complex list of things that affect your score, and I want to remember your JavaScript reputation, your C++ reputation, your public speaking reputation, like all these different skills. I want to keep them separately so that we can use that relevant reputation in the various domains if there's votes. So it keeps track of a lot of things. So yeah, an example, if the task is to give a kick-ass talk at DEF CON 3, a task I recently completed, I hope. So you can see this is what a task would look like in our current beta. You can see it's got domains, communications, and a subdomain, DEF CON 3. It's also got a skill tag. I didn't really mention those yet, but there's a skill tag system, and you earn reputation in the skills as well. So if I do this task, I will get paid. So up there it says tokens 100 in the top row. So if I do this task, I will get paid 100 tokens, and I will also earn reputation. And it's not just one reputation, but I will earn public speaking reputation. That's the skill tag. I will earn communications domain, DEF CON 3 subdomain, and more. So it affects all my reputation scores going all the way up. And how many points I get also depends on what the evaluator thought. If they gave me 5 stars, I will earn a little more than 100. And if you give me 3 stars, it will be less than 100, but that's sort of roundabout what I will get. So reputation, we want it to be this complex, rather this nuanced, so that it makes sense, so that we can use it where we want it. We have relevant reputation to ask. I'm not going to ask the lawyers about development. Right? If there was just one level of reputation, so a lawyer who does 1 hour of work and gets paid as much as a staff writer in a week, that doesn't mean that they should have that much more influence over a question that doesn't concern the legal department. So reputation has to be this nuance to be useful. And the question is this too complicated? And now we get back to the fact that we are working with the Ethereum blockchain. So we fundamentally have this conflict between meaningful reputation scores on the one hand and gas cost on the other. So every transaction you do on Ethereum has a gas cost, and gas cost to Ether, which is real world value. It's expensive, but even more so than the gas cost, there's the gas limit, which means every block in Ethereum can only process so much gas, so complex a reputation. So, and the truth is, and so this is not so much of a secret anymore, but maybe try to keep it for a while, what we're trying to do exceeds the block gas limit by far. So our reputation update is not possible to do on the blockchain. So does it have to be on the blockchain? Is the obvious next question. The easy answer is yes, of course it has to be on the blockchain, because we want it to have real world consequence. We want people to be able to vote with the reputation as a weight, and based on how they vote, money gets transferred amongst pseudonymous accounts. Like this is an on-chain security relevant thing, so it has to be on-chain. On the other hand, the answer we came up with, it doesn't have to be on-chain itself. The only thing the smart contracts need to do is they need to know how much reputation you have. The calculation itself can be off-chain as long as you can prove to the smart contract what your correct reputation is. Right? So if it's provable on-chain, that is enough. And what we came up with is a system that scales to just needing 32 bytes on-chain and captures the entire state of the reputation system. And at any one point, only this 32-byte value has to be updated on the blockchain. So here's how it works. So suppose these down here are your reputations. So R0 is my public speaking reputation in this colony, and R3 is your, like all of the different things listed, right? So if these were all stored on the blockchain, you could just point to the smart contract, say here, that's my reputation. Right? That's fine, but that's way too much data. So now suppose we run it through a hashing function. Then each one of these reputations get reduced to just 32 bytes. And those 32 bytes, the smart contract doesn't know what that means, it's just 32 bytes. But if you want to use your reputation, like you want to use R2, then you can say to the smart contract, look, I have R2, and you send what the reputation is. The smart contract can run the hashing on that input and see that it corresponds to the hash that was stored, so they know you're telling the truth. But only at the moment where you're actually using the reputation does it need to know. And it was absolutely certain that you're telling the truth, even though only the hash of it was stored on-chain. And so the rest should come as no surprise to people who are developing this field. You hash the hashes, and you hash the hashes, and you hash the hashes until there's only one left. And whenever you want to use any of the reputations down in the bottom row, you provide a list of partner hashes, so you can do a so-called Merkle proof that proves to the smart contract unambiguously that you're telling the truth, even though it didn't store anything else. So that's the reputation root hash. So all we need to do is every so often calculate what everyone's reputation is, build this tree, and submit the root hash to the blockchain, and we're done. That's what the reputation mining is about. So, yeah, how does the reputation root hash make it to the blockchain? And that's a process we call reputation mining, and it has similarities to cryptocurrency mining, which is why we called it this. So the truth is anyone can calculate the root hash. This is not like Bitcoin mining where you need huge server farms. The calculation, while it's impossible to do on Ethereum is really, really, really slow and limited. Like on a laptop, you're done. Like it's a quick calculation. So anyone can do it. It's just somebody has to submit the result. So the way you do this, you can earn rewards by submitting the correct result, and you can get punished for submitting a wrong result. That's sort of the game theory behind it. And the way this works is that you cannot prove on-chain that the submitted hash is correct, because if you wanted to do that, you'd have to run through the entire calculation, which is precisely what we cannot do. But if there's two submissions, the smart contract can determine which one is wrong. So you can always prove a wrong one wrong, you can't necessarily prove a right one right, within limits. So yeah, this is not what reputation mining looks like. As I said, all you need is a laptop and a stake in colony tokens. These are the tokens of the root colony. And again, this stake is necessary for game theoretic thing. You have to have something at stake that you lose if you're cheating. You run the colony mining client, which is an extra bit of software which scans the blockchain and calculates the correct hashes, everyone's reputation, and therefore the correct root hash. And the miners compete with each other to submit. And there's like some hurdle so that not everyone floods the transactions at the same time. They compete, and the first N, I think here it says 12, get to submit every hour. So we update it every hour. And that's also so that we want the reputation updates to be relatively smooth, because reputation weights your decision making, and we never want you to start thinking, oh, I will have to try to get this vote in before 12 because at 12 o'clock my reputation drops from that thing I did last week, and so on. Like, we don't want any of that, those kind of thinking going on. So the smoother the updates are, the less timing matters to you, and so that's why once an hour is what we came up with. Right, and miners earn colony tokens. I think miners earning tokens is a well-established paradigm. Yeah, actually, okay, so I don't need to talk about this because I've already told you that the common colony has these 20 tokens, and they're used for mining, and they pay a network fee, and you can expect rewards if you have tokens and reputation. Right, I mentioned all of this to you today. It was just, this is the DevCon audience overview, that there are incentives to do mining. You can earn more tokens and you can earn rewards based on the entire network, right, because of the fees collected by the common colony. So right, what happens if a miner tries to cheat by submitting a false hash? Or rather, if there's two submitted hashes, how can the contract determine which one is wrong? And so we play this game whereby you have all the miners have to submit a justification, which is another hash. Looks like this. So if you see RH0 in the bottom left-hand corner, that is the reputation root hash from an hour ago. And RH1 is what happens when you apply the first person's reputation update in the first domain of the first skill of whatever in our update log for the hour, and so on, step by step by step by step, until you get to the bottom right, RHN, which is what you submitted claiming to be the new correct root. And you have to submit the root justification hash for all of this, and then the contract challenges you to say, okay, prove that you did the step correctly going from the 10th to the 11th. And that corresponds to a single reputation update in a single skill in a single domain by a single person. That calculation is simple enough for the contract to verify. And then if both submit a proof that they did that one correctly, the smart contract sends another index. Try the 4th, try the 50th. And there's a systematic way where the contract can hone in on where the discrepancy is, and at some point it will have queried an index where one of the parties can no longer prove that they did it correctly because they didn't. So after time, either one party fails to respond or a mistake is found. And yeah, so if you run the mining client, you wouldn't have to worry about this. This is all automatic. But this is the system to weed out false submissions. Yeah, so that's how that's secured. So the reputation updates are entirely deterministic. If you look at the blockchain, you can see what happened. You can see everyone's actions, which tasks got paid out, which votes took place. So it's entirely deterministic to calculate the correct root hash, that's how we can do this thing on chain. If you're familiar with systems of off-chain calculation like TrueBit, this is an absolute baby version of that. TrueBit does a similar thing where you can calculate all kinds of things off-chain, really complex calculations, and then it can track steps within the execution to see if you've done it correctly. And there's a similar game theory, but this is far simpler, and we hope, therefore, also safer at first. Right, and all of this is described in the white paper, which I said came out last fall. We're still updating it daily as we get feedback and as the developers bump into new issues implementing it. But it's at colony.io, and yeah, you will get everything I said today plus more, the gory details. And finally, what is the current status? The current status is we have a beta of our app, and what our app is like a task management interface that makes it easy to create tasks, assign people to tasks, assign bounties, and all the rest. It's got a blockchain, a testnet blockchain in the background, and I think it's still hierarchical, so we don't have the distributed governance system yet. You still have administrators and workers at 2 different levels. But there's actual people using it for their teams, and we're getting real feedback. They tell us what works and what doesn't. And so that's the app that's being developed. It's just in their second beta, but it's closed, so I can't show you just yet. It will be opened up soon. And in terms of the smart contracts, ever since the white paper was finished, we've had several devs sitting down to actually implement what is written. And that work is moving on a pace too, and we hope to have something working in this quarter on a testnet. So just minimal working, like MVP. And it will have the tasks and the domains and the payouts, but maybe not the full dispute resolution. But a basic version is coming really soon. And yeah, this is where you can find us. Colony.io is the website. We could sign to the newsletter. The blog.colony.io, I like to point out especially because it's a really good blog. There's not just updates from our team, but we've also done work for legal questions, like how do Ethereum startups raise funds? What are the legalities of selling tokens? You know, what do you have to watch out for? Or making agreements with your members for equity and shares and tokens. And so there's a lot of that kind of information there too. So I really recommend you check that out. And that's all I've got for today. Thank you.
I get a question that when you say you can just put a task, assign a task to someone, make a dispute over a task, object to a task, all of those mechanisms, does it happen on-chain, or does it happen on a side chain, or does it happen somewhere?
Well, okay, so what happens on-chain? So the secret that I haven't told you about is that as written in the white paper, this is not going to fly on the Ethereum mainnet. Yeah. So simply too expensive. So the scaling side is a whole separate discussion, and we're definitely focused very much on what can be moved off-chain and what can't. But for now, a task itself has to be on-chain because it's a contract that holds the bounty in escrow and that can pay it out based on the rules of completion. But we do encourage at all stages of the process to have communications amongst your team in a side channel outside of Ethereum. We should know what your team members are thinking so that you don't even get to a dispute. You know, if you're really supposed to be communicating, and it shouldn't happen that someone creates a task and it gets disputed because you should have already, you know. But if you think about how you work day to day with your team, you guys are in agreement on what you're doing, or you have a team meeting and you decide who's going to do what. You don't then afterwards need to have a vote on, may I start this work? Yes, you know, all that. So if you're working well together, there's very limited number of steps that have to hit the blockchain. Namely, it's the creation of the task, which you can do it with the metadata, like assign the accounts, apply for the bounty, and then submit the work and submit the evaluation, and then claim the reward. So those are just those steps. They are security relevant. Everything else, like sending the first draft to your reviewer, getting it back, the second one, all that stuff, there's no reason it should ever be on the blockchain. And we are looking at methods of scaling and seeing what can, like the whole reputation system, we wanted to move it off-chain early on because it was too complex, and then after we realized that we'd moved it off-chain, we could now make it far more elaborate and nuanced, which is where we got all these little rewards for the various actions. That was fortuitous, wasn't the original plan. And yeah, like that, we're looking at moving as much off-chain as we can, but first, you know, there's also the question, like, if you have a colony where you know who the members are, like, I have to apply to become a member and the others have to agree, then there's a lot different security relevant questions, and if just any account can start doing stuff. In the fully decentralized world, when you don't know how many accounts are controlled by how many people, and a number of accounts can grow, then we're a lot more locked down with what we can allow securely, game theoretically. So I think we'll have to also see in real life how these colonies are used and what is relevant in real world, or what is premature optimization or premature game theory, as they say in the space. Yeah.
Is there maybe a basic question? Is there a mechanism for budget overruns? So can the worker ask for more tokens, for example, if he realizes that the work is more than he expected?
Yeah, so that kind of stuff, asking for more budget to a task, I would expect that it's fully possible to do that on a front-end abstraction. Like, so adding enough more tasks, what would happen in the background would be you'd create another task on the blockchain, which is also assigned to you, which has the extra budget, and when the evaluator agrees, they agree to both. So if the front end could show it like as an extra budget to your task, and then it gets abstracted into the back end as just a sequence of task calls. So, right. And that was actually one of the first things we got as feedback from people using the beta, saying, no, we need to be able to change the budget as we go along. And yes, but I expect in the back end, it'll just be a sequence of tasks. Yeah.
I have a couple of questions. The first one is the initial structure of the team locked in the smart contract, or can you change it all the way? If you need to change how the teams are set?
Yeah, you can change the structure, the domains, all the time. Creating a domain is just like creating a task. Anyone can do it as long as they have enough reputation. So you can come and say, hey, we should really have a PR department. We're growing so big. You can create that. And what happens is you put up a stake, and then you create the department. And that stake will be locked up until, I think, the first task in that domain has successfully completed, because that's the point where you realize, okay, it was probably fine that you created it and you get your security deposit back. But yes, the departments can change, and people aren't members of departments. Like, you can apply to do work in any department, in any colony even, and as long as the administrator, the manager, I call them here, accepts you, you'll become a worker, and if you earn the tokens, you'll then become a member of that colony. So you're more likely to be a sort of member in many domains. Just how much of a member you are is kind of a question of how much of the reputation in a domain is yours. Yeah, like that.
What happens when you want to change the position of a domain?
You change the position of a domain. What do you mean?
Okay, you had C++ and you want to put it in another subdomain.
Well, so it's easy to subdivide a domain further. So when previously only had a development domain, you can then create C++ and JavaScript later. But moving a domain, I don't think is possible. But so what happens when you earn reputation in a domain like JavaScript, you will also earn development domain reputation, and you will earn colony-wide reputation. But if you do a task in development, you will only earn in development and in upstairs. And if you lose reputation in a domain, you will lose the same number of reputation points going all the way up, and you will lose the same proportion of reputation going all the way down in all the children. So I don't think you can move a particular domain, but you can always subdivide even further. Yeah, you had a question.
Yeah, so look, so great job on the way you've laid out the mechanisms of reputation and payments. Now, so let's say you build this project partly on the chain and not on the chain. and someone else creates Colonna, which is the same features, but hosted on the central server, and presumably with more features. What's the problem with implementing exactly those features on a central server that you solve by putting it on the blockchain?
Well, so if you do this on a central server, you could do it a lot faster and a lot cheaper and a lot simpler, and the people running the server can steal everyone's funds. Right? You have no security guarantee. You're completely dependent on this third party, not just to host your stuff, and not just to not run away with the funds, or not, cheat and mess around with your balances, but also you have to trust them to stay up. Right? So the nice thing about Colony on the blockchain is not just the security of having the funds locked into the smart contract logic that nobody can circumvent, but nobody can kill a project as long as people want to keep working on it. Right? If there's a colony and you can just dump in and start doing work, and as I said, you apply for work, nobody objects, you can do the work, you can start earning reputation, and as long as there's people actively working on a project, over time they will be that project. Like everyone else's reputation will have decayed away, but nobody can stop you continuing. Like a project cannot be killed by somebody running, there's no central off switch. So,
except the majority token holders.
The majority token holders, well, so if reputation holders and token holders are in disagreement, they can kind of grind everything to a standstill on some level, I suppose. Well, even that's not quite true. But yeah, the security, the reason we do it on decentralized blockchain is so that we can act with people in other countries, and also, it's one of these things where here in the West we're not so sensitive to the need for trusting third parties, but it's not just that you don't have to trust your local telecom or your local government. So if you're in a country with really corrupt institutions, it also helps you being able to sell your services to an audience outside, because you can say to everyone, look, I'm not dependent on these guys, you can work with me directly over the blockchain. So, and because we want to allow this vast coordination over the internet with pseudonymous entities, there really is no logical, there is no third party that could host it in a way. Yeah.
Thanks.
And doesn't the whole dispute and reputation system leads to some kind of dictatorship of people with high reputation? Because if, let's say someone wants to propose an idea and that person has like 40% of the reputation, other people see it and they see how this guy has most of the reputation, so if I vote for him, my idea will pass, his idea will pass, and I will earn some reputation. So the guy with the most reputation gets even more, and the other people are incentivized to vote for that guy's idea, even if they are not in agreement.
So, if there is a very imbalanced reputation within a colony, then it is possible for the people who hold the supermajority to steer things so that they keep that supermajority. And that would be a colony by colony thing. I would hope that we make it really obvious when colonies have that problem, and then you just don't work with them. There's no reason why they shouldn't be allowed to exist, but we should make it obvious to people that this is not the control is very centralized. But one more aspect I didn't mention, whenever some people lose reputation and others win reputation based on some dispute, the total reputation still goes down. It is lost, so you can't use this to sort of through the back door make a reputation transfer from one person to another, which I said was impossible. So you could try to say, oh, I want to give him my reputation, so we're just going to make a dispute where I lose and he wins. But the way it's done, the reputation is always lost in these kind of processes. So we really do want to disincentivize the dispute system. But yeah, no, it's a good point. Not every colony will be fair and meritocratic, but that's okay. They don't have to be. You can create one with you and your 3 friends and give yourself all the tokens and reputation in your colony you want. And yeah, nobody will probably join you and work for your tokens. Like if I saw that, I'd say I do work for, maybe, well, no, I just wouldn't join you. No.
Yeah, but over time, it may lead to some person having more and more and more, because the more you have chances to get things. So.
But you would still need to actually be doing work and being paid. And so while you have more influence, you don't have full control. And besides, it also, the bigger a colony gets, the harder it is going to be. The more domains there are, the harder it's going to be to control the top level domain. And that's also one of the reasons why we have the escalation system. So we do think it's possible that within smaller teams, somebody just ends up with an overwhelming majority of reputation. But if you have this, one JavaScript developer who was doing most of the work for the last 6 months and ends up with 80% within that domain, if they make decisions that everyone else just doesn't like, they can say, nope, let's ask the entire development team because we think this one guy is wrong. And so that this reason of being able to escalate is precisely to filter out the imbalances in the smaller units. Okay. Yeah. And also the punishment. So I said, if it goes 59 to 41% against you, it's fine. If it's 90 to 10, you lose a lot. That's also not quite true. I was simplifying things because in the threshold for you losing everything, what we call a landslide loss in a dispute, is 90% when it's in a small domain, but it's 2/3 when it's all the way up. So I'm saying that the lower down you go, the higher the imbalance has to be before it hurts you.
So you don't want to trigger a big dispute and lose it?
I don't want to trigger what?
A big high-level dispute and lose it when you lost?
Yeah, you don't. You only want to escalate the dispute if you have a reasonable assumption that you're going to win, and that's just to prevent spamming and constant escalation. But that's why we communicate. I mean, we want to encourage people to communicate and know what their team members are thinking before they use the blockchain for dispute resolution. All right. I'm going to go with back there.
How exactly is reputation decreasing?
How is it decreasing? It is, the way it's written, it's an exponential decay with a half-life of, I think, 6 months, 3 months. A lot of these numbers in the white paper, like the half-life or the 90% here, or the 0.1% stake here, we just made them up. There's no way to know what's a good value until we've seen some colonies in action, and we're going to collect a lot of empirical data to treat that. Yeah, but it's an approximated exponential decay because
it's going to change probably afterwards, and it's the same for everybody.
For now, as written, it's the same for everybody. Yes. We can think about making it a adjustable parameter in the colony, but the more parameters you allow a colony to change. For each parameter, you have to think, well, what are the abuse potentials? What are the long-term consequences? Do the token holders need to have a vote, or just the reputational? And there's, of course, the conceptual, the cognitive work people would have to do of studying. What is this weird variable I've never heard of? So we try to not make them all. We try to come up with good defaults ourselves, rather than saying, oh, well, the colonies just set them themselves, because that's just, that's one way of us not doing the work, saying, oh, you set them, but no. So we want to come up with good defaults that work in most cases. And a few, like the 10-90 split, where 90% of the incoming revenue goes back to the colony and 10% gets paid out, that is clearly something that should be changeable. But that requires a colony-wide vote in order to pass, and that kind of a resolution can only be triggered once every, I don't know, like month or once per quarter, something like that. So we have, I'm rambling, sorry. All right, one here.
I have an interest in the control mechanisms for controlling scarcity of the coins, both the core, the community tokens and the colony tokens. If, for example, how are new of the common colony tokens created? And for the tokens, if a group can decide just to print or just to create new tokens, wouldn't it devalue the tokens that token holders are already holding?
Yeah, so how do new tokens get created? Who gets to decide, and wouldn't that devalue the existing tokens? So at first, tokens are created when the colony is created. Or rather, in the same vein of this continuous flow, thought it might not be a good idea to have all the tokens sitting in the common colony's budget, in the common central pot of the colony. What actually happens is we set a ceiling. This is how many tokens will be created, and a token generation rate. So at that rate, they become available to the colony-wide pot, the top domain, and they can assign it to other domains. And so there's a continuous allocation. And all the reputation holders together can modify the rate at which they get created, but only within, I think, 10% per month maximum, if they want to increase it, if they find they're running out because there's so much activity. And once the token that hits the ceiling, then they can no longer create any more. They'd have to rely on earning back their tokens one way or another. And if beyond that you want to create new tokens, yes, you will dilute all the token holders and they will lose the value, so they have to agree to it. So for that kind of a thing to happen, we need a vote that requires a supermajority of token holders to agree and reputation to agree, and have enough lead-in time that if you disagree with it, you can sell and get out. Like, we want to, of course, we don't want to have some people just screw around with your tokens by suddenly inflating the supply, but we realize that we need a mechanism by which it is possible. For, just like a company might, I don't want to say too much about shares because then I give people wrong ideas about what these things are, but there's a similar kind of mechanism. If you all agree to print more, to create more, then it should be possible. It just should be, everyone should be in agreement as much as possible. And I think we said supermajority of both reputation and tokens. Yeah, and that's the one instance where really we have a token-weighted vote. And usually we don't like those because we don't want, people with the most money aren't often the best people to make decisions in management for the day-to-day operations, but this clearly is a case where they have to.
So there's a ceiling for the common colony?
The common colony will also have a ceiling, yes. No token inflates unbounded, but if you're running out and you don't agree to an increase, then you might end up with a situation where you just have to close domains and fire people. Or not create tasks. Yeah, you run out of funds, then you have a problem. If you're earning funds back because you're selling your own services for your own tokens, or you're earning tokens by another mechanism, you can be sustainable without creating new tokens. And then we're hoping that there at least will be colonies that get to that state. Yeah. Maybe I'm going to go with two more. One back there.
Yeah.
And then
what kind of typical environment did you design colony? Is it for only pre-ICO project, or is it for a typical company which were...
So what kind of company is colony is for?
Yeah.
That's a very interesting question because we got interest from very, very different companies, and we were surprised in some ourselves. One is the small startup, in this crypto space. Clearly, it's an example, but we also have found interest from humongous companies, like with thousands and thousands of employees who want to use this internally because they found it's a nice way of defining what work needs to be done separately from who does it. So they can far more flexibly assign work within their organization while still keeping an account of exactly who did what. So the task management and the accounting thereof are sort of fused together, and they can find pockets of unused talent within their huge workforce or underused people because it gives people in the company the ability to put in extra work or try to show that they can do things beyond their nominal department. So we've got those extremes coming to us. And then maybe one more that's interesting is digital agencies that are used to having a small workforce, maybe 10, 15 people, and a few hundred contributors to do one-off projects. So they would use the colony internally to manage their affairs, and whenever they give work to one of their contractors, it would be in one of these Ether-denominated contracts where the person gets paid but doesn't earn reputation because it's an external currency. So managing a lot of external contributors, especially for that kind of work which can be submitted digitally and with computer-savvy people anyway, they're also a good early fit. But in the long term, we hope it will be so flexible that whole new organizational structures will appear from this. But for this version 1.0, task management with bounties, and then adding some horizontal management. We'll see where it goes. Hey, one last question, I think. I'm going to go with you.
Hello. Thank you for this presentation. Personal question, like a little joke. This name, why colony?
Yeah,
Why
me
colony?
also. What that means?
So, the original image was that of an ant colony, without a queen, I would assume in this case. But it's the little tasks done by individual workers that together produce something far greater than they could ever have imagined. They do influence each other in what they do, but nobody is really the commander who decides everything, but collectively. So it's this thing of collective intelligence. Like sometimes you call it wisdom of the crowds, but we like to call it the collective intelligence. The more people work together in a structured way that enhances their cooperation, you get these grand projects that you couldn't have envisioned beforehand. Yeah, so ants and not empires.
But terms refer to a dominant power that govern the small people. So
No. So yeah, it's specifically don't want to go with the political colonies, ant colonies we had in mind when we started this project.
When you see the word, remember you this kind of.
Yeah, people have confronted us with this before, but for now we're sticking with it. Maybe we'll add some ants to the logo to make it clear. I don't know. I don't have logo reputation. I can't weigh in on that. Yeah, it's what we're trying to say is there's lots of little entities coming together to work on a grander project. That's sort of the image we're trying to convey. All right. Well, guys, thank you so much. I do want to keep talking with you. I just don't want to hold the microphone any longer. So let's continue the conversation over whatever looks really tasty back there. Some French baked goods.